13,000 troops. That's the number now attached to a large-scale mobilization by Russia's Pacific Fleet, described as one of the bigger readiness drills the fleet has run in recent memory. According to a report from Azur News, the exercise pulls together thousands of personnel, plus naval and coastal units, across Russia's Far East. Russian state channels haven't published a detailed breakdown of the drill, which leaves an obvious question hanging. What is a force this size actually training to do, and why now? Over the next several minutes, we'll go through what's been reported about this exercise, what hasn't been confirmed, and how a mobilization of this scale fits into the broader pattern of Russian naval activity in the Pacific. Here's what we actually know, and just as important, what we don't. We know which branch is involved: the Pacific Fleet, one of Russia's 4 fleets, responsible for the entire eastern flank of the country, stretching from the Sea of Japan through the Sea of Okhotsk up to the Bering Strait and the North Pacific. We know the rough scale, about 13,000 personnel per the Azur News report. What we don't have, at least not yet in public reporting, is a full breakdown of which specific units are involved, the precise training areas, or a stated objective beyond the general framing of a readiness exercise, sometimes called war games in English language coverage. We'll go through the confirmed pieces first, then place them in context, because a single number, without context, doesn't tell you much about what a military is actually doing. Start with what the report itself says. The core claim is simple. The Pacific Fleet has begun a large-scale exercise, and the personnel figure cited is around 13,000. That number puts it in the upper range of fleet-level drills, the kind that requires moving people, equipment, often ships and aircraft, across a fleet's operating area rather than a routine drill involving a single base or squadron. The report frames this as one of the more significant readiness exercises the Pacific Fleet has staged recently, though recently is doing some work there. Russian forces run exercises on a rolling basis at different scales all year, and public reporting on the smaller ones is often thin or non-existent. What makes a 13,000 troop figure notable isn't that a drill is happening. It's that the scale and the specificity of the reporting was enough to draw outside attention in the first place. What the source doesn't specify matters just as much. There's no confirmed list of participating units, no confirmed geographic training zone beyond the Pacific Fleet's area, and no officially stated objective tied to a specific scenario. That gap isn't unusual for early reporting on Russian military exercises. Official Russian statements on drills often arrive thin on specifics, and outside analysts frequently have to infer scope from satellite imagery, ship tracking data, or after-the-fact summaries. Until more sourcing shows up, from Russia's Ministry of Defense, from state media like TASS or Interfax, or from independent Western analysis, the safest description of this event is a large Pacific Fleet exercise involving roughly 13,000 personnel reported by Azur News, with the operational details unconfirmed. To understand why a number like this matters, it helps to know what the Pacific Fleet actually is and where it sits in Russia's broader military structure. Russia splits its navy into 4 main fleets, plus the Caspian Flotilla, the Northern Fleet, based around the Kola Peninsula and covering Arctic and North Atlantic waters, the Baltic Fleet, the Black Sea Fleet, and the Pacific Fleet, headquartered in Vladivostok. The Pacific Fleet's area of responsibility is enormous, covering the Sea of Japan, the Sea of Okhotsk, the waters around the Kuril Islands, and stretching into the Bering Sea and the broader North Pacific. It's also, by most open-source military assessments, home to a major share of Russia's sea-based nuclear deterrent. The fleet's submarine base at Rybachia, near Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky on the Kamchatka Peninsula, hosts ballistic missile submarines that form one leg of Russia's nuclear triad, a fact that's well documented and not in dispute. That detail is worth sitting with for a second. Whatever this exercise turns out to involve, it's happening within a fleet whose core mission includes keeping a survivable nuclear deterrent thousands of miles from Russia's western borders. I went back through past reporting on Pacific Fleet activity to see how this exercise compares to the fleet's normal rhythm, and one thing stood out. Unlike the Baltic or Black Sea fleets, which have been in the spotlight constantly since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the Pacific Fleet mostly operates outside Western media attention, punctuated occasionally by a joint patrol with China, a missile test, or a large exercise like this one. That relative quiet doesn't mean the fleet is inactive. It means that when a story about it does break through, like this one has, it's usually because the scale or the timing is unusual enough to be newsworthy on its own. So the fleet itself isn't new, and neither, really, is the idea of a large Pacific readiness drill. What's being reported now is the scale of this particular one. To judge whether 13,000 troops is large, small, or just average for this part of the world, you have to compare it to Russia's other big, publicly tracked exercises, and that's where things get more interesting. Russia's largest, most publicized military exercises are the quadrennial strategic drills, exercises like Vostok, Zapad, and Kavkaz, which rotate through different military districts roughly every year, cycling through the country's 4 strategic directions. Vostok, meaning east, is the one most directly relevant here, since it's centered on Russia's eastern military district and typically draws in Pacific Fleet assets alongside Army and Air Force units. In past iterations, Russian officials have cited troop figures reaching into the tens of thousands for Vostok, though outside estimates from Western defense analysts have at times differed substantially from Moscow's official numbers, especially for the 2022 iteration, which took place while a large share of Russia's combat power was already committed to the war in Ukraine. That gap between official Russian figures and independent assessments keeps showing up in how these exercises get reported, and it's a useful reminder to treat any single-source troop count, including the 13,000 figure here, as a reported claim rather than a verified fact until something else corroborates it. Set against that backdrop, a fleet-level exercise of roughly 13,000 troops is substantial, but it's not automatically comparable to a full strategic-level drill like Vostok, which folds in multiple branches of the armed forces across an entire military district, not just naval and coastal units under one fleet's command. Without more detail on exactly which forces are counted in this figure, whether it's purely Pacific Fleet personnel or whether it also includes embedded Army, Air Force, or National Guard units training alongside the Navy, it's hard to say precisely how this drill stacks up against Russia's biggest publicized exercises. What can be said with more confidence is that it looks larger than the routine, smaller-scale drills the Pacific Fleet runs throughout the year, the kind that rarely make international news at all. Here's the part that's easy to miss if you only look at the headline number. The why now question probably matters more than the how many won. Militaries hold readiness exercises on planned cycles, and the timing of a given drill can be entirely routine, tied to an annual training calendar, or it can be timed to sit alongside a broader geopolitical moment. Right now, without a confirmed exercise name, a stated scenario, or an official explanation from Russia's Ministry of Defense, we don't have enough to say which of those this is. What we can say is what the regional context looks like in general terms, because that part is well established and doesn't depend on this specific report. The Pacific Fleet's operating area sits close to Japan, South Korea, North Korea, and across the Bering Strait, the United States via Alaska and the Aleutian Islands. Russia has a long-running territorial dispute with Japan over the southern Kuril Islands, called the Northern Territories in Japan, and Russian military activity near that chain routinely draws attention from Tokyo. Since 2021, Russia and China have also expanded joint naval patrols and joint bomber flights in the Pacific and around Japan, something both Western and Japanese defense officials have tracked closely and discussed in public assessments. Any large Russian naval mobilization in this region, whatever its specific purpose, is going to be watched by Japan's Ministry of Defense, by U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, and by regional media simply because of where it's happening. That's also where a legitimate difference of interpretation comes in, and it's worth stating plainly. Some Western defense analysts argue that large, publicized Russian exercises in recent years function at least as much as signaling, a show of continued capability and resolve aimed at foreign audiences, as they do as genuine large-scale combat training, especially given how much of Russia's most capable ground and air power has been tied down in Ukraine since 2022. Russian officials, for their part, consistently describe these drills in defensive and readiness terms, tied to standard training cycles rather than any external message. Both framings show up in open reporting, and this video isn't going to pretend one of them is simply correct. What's true is that a 13,000-troop Pacific exercise, whatever its internal purpose, doesn't happen in a geopolitical vacuum. Neighboring states will read it, at least in part, as a signal, whether or not that was the primary intent. What strikes me most about stories like this one is how much of the public narrative rests on a single reported number, repeated and amplified, long before the fuller picture, unit composition, training areas, actual objectives, becomes available, if it ever fully does. That's not a knock on the reporting itself. A wire-style figure like 13,000 troops is exactly the kind of concrete detail responsible outlets can verify or attribute, even when the surrounding context stays murky. It's more a note on how these stories tend to evolve. An initial figure breaks, regional media pick it up, and only later, if at all, do fuller assessments from defense specialist outlets fill in the operational detail. So, where does that leave us? What do you think? Does a mobilization like this look more like standard training or more like deliberate signaling timed to the moment? It's a genuinely open question, and it's one regional governments are almost certainly asking behind closed doors right now, not just online. To sum up what's actually confirmed versus what isn't, confirmed, according to Azar News, is that Russia's Pacific Fleet has begun a large-scale exercise involving roughly 13,000 troops. Confirmed, from established open-source military knowledge, is the Pacific Fleet's structure, its area of responsibility spanning the Sea of Japan to the Bering Sea, its role in Russia's nuclear deterrent through the submarine base at Rybachia, and the fleet's proximity to Japan, South Korea, and the United States. Unconfirmed, at least as of this reporting, is the exercise's official name if it has one, the specific units and equipment involved beyond the general troop figure, the precise geographic training areas, and any officially stated scenario or objective. Also unconfirmed is how the 13,000 figure was calculated, and whether it includes only naval personnel or also Army, Air Force, or National Guard units training alongside the fleet. If you want to verify or follow this story further rather than take any single video's word for it, the most useful places to look are Russia's Ministry of Defense statements. When and if they're published, Russian state outlets like TASS and Interfax for the official framing, and Western-facing defense outlets like USNI News and Naval News, which specialize in cross-checking these claims against satellite, imagery, ship tracking data, and independent analysis. Comparing how the story is covered across those different sources, official Russian, regional wire, and Western defense specialist, is usually the fastest way to see where the real points of agreement and disagreement are. We'll be tracking whether more detail on this exercise emerges in the coming days, including any confirmation of an exercise name, the specific bases and ships involved, or statements from Japan's or the United States defense establishments in response. If a fuller picture comes together, that's a story on its own, worth returning to.